at your headlines rather. A bloody morning today outside the Randburg Magistrate Court. 2 witnesses are murdered. They were meant to testify in an assault case involving police officers, but were gunned down outside the courtroom. We'll be speaking to a forensic investigator in just a moment. President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Chief Justice stressed the importance of protecting whistleblowers, with the President promising to strengthen efforts to protect those who expose corruption. And the city of Cape Town is investing millions of rands to tighten security ahead of the festive season. This follows the killing of tourists and also a number of muggings, particularly in sandparks. Law enforcement agencies as well working together to ensure a safer festive season. So today, outside the Randburg Magistrates Court, 2 people who were due to testify in an assault case involving police officers were shot dead on the street. Now, crime is an everyday reality in our country, but this blatant assassination has stunned even the most battle-hardened among us. Let's speak now to Chad Thomas. He's a financial and organised crime investigator. Chad, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Was this an organised killing in your assessment?
Look, they say if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, in all probability it's a duck. It's a horrendous set of circumstances that played out this morning. And although we have very violent crime in South Africa, we talk about people being fortunate not being shot during a hijacking or not being shot during a home invasion, but we do hear of people being shot during street robberies, etc. One could say that this could have been a robbery gone wrong, but coincidence plays a massive role in all of this. The fact that they were on their way to court, that they were witnesses in a matter that involved people accused of violence, seems to suggest that there's definitely a link between the 2 incidents.
Yeah, we do know that the police officers who were out on bail, who are out on bail, are not being treated as suspects as yet. We understand their devices have been seized, they've been tested for gunpowder residue, etc., etc. What we understand about this case is that the woman is a domestic worker, and a house in Midrand was robbed a few years ago. She was accused of being involved in some way, arrested by the police, and then she says that she was taken out of custody and assaulted. Obviously, she's been freed since then, so I would imagine the charges against her came to nothing. But essentially, I mean, this woman, she's blowing the whistle on potentially corrupt police. And we've just heard this afternoon our President and our Chief Justice speaking out about the need to protect whistleblowers. And you know, if you look at a case like that, and if that was indeed a hit, surely anyone who might be building up the courage to speak out against crime is going to look at that and go, hang on, let me think again.
Well, it is ironic, isn't it, that on the one day that our country comes together with the President to discuss corruption and the protection of witnesses and whistleblowers, here we have people assassinated in broad daylight. Now, what's so surprising in South Africa is we used to talk about hits taking place between rival gangs. We would talk about collateral damage where innocent bystanders may have been caught up in the crossfire. Now we hear of people being killed simply because somebody wants their business tender, somebody wants their contract, somebody perhaps wants to move in on their taxi route. We even have councillors being taken out so people can move further up on the political list. South Africa now has the unenviable position of having a term for our hitmen. We saw in South America in the late 80s, early 90s, the term Sicario come out. Well, in South Africa, a group of assassins are called eNCA, and an assassin is known as an Inkabi. And it just shows you how deplorable the situation is, that we actually have terminology for an industry that seems to be booming in South Africa, and that industry is murder for hire.
And speaking of that, you know, you look at organised crime, that's what you do. If we think of assassins, most of us tend to think of KwaZulu-Natal and the taxi industry. Is that where most of the guns for hire, the assassins, still emanate from?
A lot of it does. A lot of it originates in KwaZulu-Natal, either rural KwaZulu-Natal or in Umlazi from Cleveland's hostels. These guys have been trained. It started off as a result of faction fighting. Later we had the institutionalized violence that took place in the early 1990s, pre-1994, between the ANC SDUs and the IFP MPs. Of course, this grew when our country reached freedom, and we suddenly had a very commercial, informal market. And that informal market being the taxi industry, there was a lot of vying for routes. And we saw out of that this massive development in respect of the monetization of murder for hire. People that were doing hits for taxi operators were doing it as a part-time gig. We now know that people are literally being trained, and there's no shortage of weapons, whether it's weapons that are brought in across the border, whether it's arms caches, whether it's weapons that are stolen off police officers, defense force members, or security officers. There isn't a shortage of weapons, and with the massive unemployment, there isn't a shortage of people lining up wanting to be employed. The concern that we have, of course, is the fact that South Africans have become very desensitized to this. When one looks at the murders of prominent individuals like AKA, we saw the image of the person actually pulling the trigger. And that person did it in broad daylight, didn't even bother to disguise themselves. That's how blatant assassinations are becoming in South Africa, and how numb we as South Africans are becoming towards the scourge.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was discussing what happened outside the Randburg Magistrate Court with my colleagues a little earlier in the newsroom, and I was saying it sounds quite similar to what happened to AKA. We know that in the case of, in today's case, there was a black Mercedes, whether someone stepped out or shot directly from the vehicle at this couple. With the AKA video, you can see this person weaving through the busy Friday night or Saturday night crowds who'd gathered there, almost like a goldfish. He just came up to him and his friend, 2 or 3 shots, and off he went, just disappeared into the crowd again. And as you say, it seems to be getting more and more brazen. So how much does it cost to put a hit on someone these days, Chad?
It's relative. When we talk about hits, we can also talk about ransoms in kidnapping. We've heard of children that are being kidnapped in informal settlements and being returned to their parents for as little as 500 Rand. We've then heard of people that are kidnapped in wealthy communities where it's tens of millions of rands that are paid in ransom. The same now applies with hits. You can hire a hitman for anywhere from 500 to 2,000 Rand, depending on the level of security that the intended target has, how that person travels, whether that person is an easy or hard target, and it all varies. So it's completely relative to the target and how much the person wants to spend to eliminate that target. And that's what's so frightening. You can hire hitmen now across the board.
Chad, recently we've seen what seems to be progress. We know that there's a special kidnapping unit that's been set up, and they've had some success, it seems, in releasing people who have been held for ransom. We've also seen quite a few very bloody shootouts between police and suspected criminals. I think there was incidents in Inanda, but in the area of KwaZulu-Natal specifically. Does that suggest police are making gradual but definite progress?
The Minister of Police said earlier today that criminals have declared war on the citizens of South Africa, and this was after the attack on the Minister of Transport's cavalcade, where she was robbed together with her protectors. And we've known about this war for a very long time, and we've asked for the South African Police Services to reciprocate in kind. If criminals want to act violent, we need a police force that stands up to them. And as it stands right now, our police force needs to be fully capacitated. It needs budget to be allocated correctly. And we need to see far more intelligence-driven investigations. And this is what we have been seeing with these various operations. It's intelligence-driven. It's using people on the ground that have knowledge of areas, that have sources and informants who are able to provide actionable intelligence for the police service to act upon. And if we can have resources that are not abused, allocated towards capacitating intelligence services even further, we will definitely see a mark made in this war, because that's what it is. We have to acknowledge the fact that people are dying in South Africa at the same rates that people are dying in war zones. So for the police to be fully capacitated, budget has to be correctly allocated, and intelligence services have to be able to be resourced so that they can fight adequately.
Yeah, and it's certainly not an overstatement to say that it's like a war zone. If you look at some areas that are engaged in war, our daily rate of murders around, I think it's 60 per day or something like that, is sometimes higher than certain war zones. So you've mentioned the importance of intelligence resources, and that's led to some of the breakthroughs we've seen. But just to go back to the Transport Minister situation, now that's a case where it seems spikes were thrown across the road. It's on the N3 between Heidelberg and Vosloorus. The car then had to stop. Her and her protectors were robbed. It was interesting today because my colleague Heidi Jokos spoke to the Provincial Police Commissioner, Elias Mawela, who was very angry about the fact that he said in 2021 he flagged a number of roads in and around Johannesburg that were dangerous crime hotspot areas. And he said they needed better resources on those roads. They needed simple things like well-lit roads. That specific road is not one of those that he flagged, but his point is well made. He says he was ignored. He sent that letter to the then Premier, also to the Transport Department, and he was ignored. So yes, we need the crime intelligence. We also need more boots on the ground. But Chad, do we also need people to simply do their job and listen and act on information they're given by police when they say this area needs urgent attention?
Of course, and you're seeing other people getting involved in what's called force multiplying. We have force multipliers from the private security industry through what's known as the E2 project. We know that provincial traffic departments, metropolitan police departments, and municipal traffic departments also have law enforcement capacity. We need to start looking towards a one-force system where these force multipliers can be effectively utilized so that they can assist the police at this point in time, because right now there isn't a quick fix. So we have to take what's available to us and use it as effectively as possible. And when one looks at the Green Security Warden project, we call it the Green Mambas, that project wasn't well thought out. You've got members out there that haven't been fully capacitated. They're not completely versed in policing. Some of them don't even have peace officer status, yet they were brought in supposedly to supplement the police and to create this force multiplier of boots on the ground. That was done incorrectly. That R500 million could have been spent to effectively recapacitate some of the skills deficit that we're seeing within the police. And also one must realize that having more boots on the ground doesn't necessarily equate to prosecutions, because somebody still has to investigate those crimes. And we've got a skills deficit within our detective services. We've lost 1,000 seasoned detectives in 5 years that haven't been replaced, and the Hawks are only at 50% capacitation. So we have to look at how budget is allocated and make sure that that money is used effectively.
Absolutely. Every single cent counts. Thank you so much, Chad Thomas. He's a financial and organised crime investigator. Let's stay